I am so grateful to be back with someone I have such respect for. This is, of course, TJ Woodward, the author of Conscious Recovery and his new book, Conscious Creation. TJ was my coach, helped me through my dark time. And so whenever we're talking about recovery, I go straight to the master, the man who wrote the book on conscious recovery. So TJ, I'm going to hide myself and ask you to share with our audience, what is conscious recovery?
Wow. Well, thank you, Scott. I'm so honored to be here and really so honored to have walked with you through your own process, because that's really what this is about. You know, I had my own many times dark night of the soul related to addiction and recovery, and it's now my honor to share that with as many people as possible. And you know me well, Scott, so you know I love to talk about this. So I'm so grateful to be here.
It's great to have you here, TJ. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So conscious recovery actually began as a result of my own journey. And when I talk about conscious recovery, I like to go way back to the beginning. And the reason I go back to the beginning is that it is important because it's the foundation of conscious recovery that might be a little different than some of the models. So what do I mean by that? I remember being a very young child and being absolutely filled with joy, very much in love with myself and the world, very much in an awareness of how lucky I was to be alive, how grateful I was for life. And I was born into a family where what people were saying, what people were doing, and the energy I was feeling were three totally different things. I remember watching TV and seeing war for the first time on TV. I remember hearing men talk about women in a derogatory way. I remember being present with my grandfather, who I loved dearly, and hearing him say things that were overtly racist and quite violent, actually. And the reason I start with that is this experience of being open, loving, and grateful shut down for me. And I say for me consciously, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. A wall came around my heart around the age of 7. And I know now that was me, what we would call survival mechanism. I've actually reframed it to call these things brilliant strategies. So it did save me from all of the things that were happening in my life. But it also protected me from the love and connection I truly desired. Why do I start with that? I start with that because the foundational principle of conscious recovery is underneath all addictive behavior is an essential self that is whole and perfect. That's what is different about conscious recovery than some of the models. And it's from my own story, and it's from many years of working with people who feel broken, who feel damaged, who feel the world isn't safe, who are living in a paradigm of scarcity, fear, and disconnection. And the starting point, that there's a place within each of us that is unharmed and unharmable, is a really different framework. So I got sober young, 1986, just before my 21st birthday. And around 18 months sober, I found myself suicidal. And the reason I was suicidal at 18 months sober is I hadn't done any of the deeper work of actually healing the underlying root causes of my addiction. I met a woman named Mary Helen who changed my life, who took me on a journey that is really twofold. One, healing all the unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame that led to my addiction, while also reconnecting or becoming aware of that essential self that is still was within me and is within each and every one of us. So that became the foundation of conscious recovery. And I could just talk forever, Scott, you know that, but I started working in the field in 2008. I don't know if you want me to get into all of that at this point, but that really is the foundation of conscious recovery. We can heal. There is a place within us that's whole and perfect. Recovery is not about becoming something. It's about unbecoming and returning to that essential self.
Wow. You know, what I loved so much about working with you is that in Love Coach Academy, that's our teaching also, that we're not here to evaluate or diagnose what's wrong with someone. We're here to help them remember how wonderful they are and that life is hard. That, you know, what they think is wrong with them is that they are dealing with very difficult circumstances. And so your reminder of that we are whole and perfect, and it's about coming back to that place. I just yesterday posted on Facebook a meme of Yogananda saying the greatest sin is to think of ourselves as sinners. We are all just children of God.
That's
So
right.
it's,
Yeah.
so
And
for the person who's in shame, and honestly, that was my thing. I had shame when I would drink too much after my wife died. And I'd have shame that I was, I was hungover, and then the shame would feed the part of me that then wanted to escape. And so what I loved about your work that was so profound was how it changed the cycle of shame. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, please.
yeah, thank you, Scott. I have identified one of the root causes of addiction as toxic shame, and that's as a result of coming into the world and having these series of events that are traumatic, also known as being born on planet Earth, and then also disconnecting from our true nature and starting to develop this shame core, or this belief that we're broken. And as a starting point, we want to look at how that shame is continuing to perpetuate itself. So what I mean by that is, if I'm walking around with a core false belief, and I like to call them core false beliefs rather than core beliefs, because I want to acknowledge that they're lies that we've picked up about ourselves. And it's much more than a thought, it's a frequency, right? So if I'm walking around with the belief that I'm unlovable, then I act that way in the world, and I unconsciously choose partners to confirm that. And as you're saying, that's the shame spiral, right? I feel broken, I act broken, and then I feel more shame because of the behavior, and we're in this downward spiral where we can say, see, look, I am unworthy. See, look, I am unlovable. This person just left me. All the conclusions that we come to actually create the evidence. And this is really huge. It's not the evidence creates the conclusion. It's that we have usually very early in our lives decided these fundamental truths, which of course are not true, core false beliefs. And then we walk around vibrating with that frequency, and we replicate that, or we continue to draw in or be attracted to situations to confirm that. So the way we interrupt that is to pause, to unplug from the behaviors and start to look at the shame itself, and then start to, through vulnerability and authenticity, have a safe place to start sharing these things so that we're not acting from that. Then the deeper work is going back and looking at where these core false beliefs originated and how do we actually go back and heal them, because we can.
So, question for people that are, again, either dealing with addiction or compulsive behavior, or they have someone close to them. What do you think? Well, let's start with the person who has a friend, right? Because I know you always have great advice about what to do and what not to do when wanting to support somebody that you love that's lost in a compulsive cycle or an addictive cycle. So what's your words of wisdom for that situation?
Well, I think what we want to start with is what the paradigm, how it's been established, looking back. And that has been some version of what we once called tough love. I don't know if we're still saying that. I don't think tough and love actually are congruent. I think they're two different things. So this idea that I'm going to withhold my love from you unless you get better is something that I think has run its course. Mm-hmm. I think people are still believing that works, but it doesn't seem to be working. So what I'm saying here is, I'm really inviting someone to ask the question, how am I viewing my friend, my loved one, my child, my parent? How am I viewing that person? Am I saying what's wrong with them? Or am I saying what is the pain that they're managing? Right? So compassion is the key. Now, it's tricky when it's someone closest to us. A wise person once said to me, it's often more difficult for the people closest to the person with an addiction to actually help them. So I want to be clear. We want to bring in professionals, bring in support groups, because sometimes I'm the last person that can help someone that's really close to me. Now, why is that? Because we have so much history. I've worked with parents, and I have so much compassion for them. They are afraid they're going to get that phone call at 3 a.m. that their child is dead. And having compassion for that, and if I say to them, well, don't look at your child as broken, look at them as whole and perfect, that might be a big leap for them. So we might say, are you looking at them through the lens of what's wrong with them? And is there someone you can bring in that can see for them that which they can't see for themselves? In other words, if I can't see that for my nephew, for my sister, for my loved one, is there someone who I can invite into the equation that can? Because that is how we actually begin to change. You know, we can go into a whole conversation about the quantum field, but if I'm looking at someone as broken, it creates more brokenness. Shame doesn't heal shame, only love will do that. And so if I'm not capable of that, let's bring in some people to help out.
Right. And if it's so funny that you use that analogy, because one of my best friends right now has exactly that situation. Her son is drinking, he's had a DUI, he hasn't resolved it, and she's really so afraid of getting that phone call. What about support for the person in that situation for themselves? Self-empathy, self-care.
Well, I want to start by saying there's nothing wrong with you. And that may sound like an obvious statement to some of us, but for the people I've worked with who are going through an addiction, they have a difficult time often believing that. Now, you know, you and I, Scott, we would actually say, we wouldn't say there's nothing wrong with you. We would say you're whole and perfect. But to start with what they're not is important, because shame, as we've discussed, brings on the behavior that could be seen as shameful, and then there's more shame. So if I come in and say, yeah, why do you keep doing this? This is causing so much pain. We want to start saying, what's underneath this? What is the addiction trying to manage? You know, I think about anger. We send people to anger management classes. And what I want to say is, rather than sending someone to a class to learn how to manage their anger, we want to say, what is the anger managing? Now, that's the same with addiction, right? Not what's wrong with you? Why do you keep doing this? This is insane. Why are you jeopardizing your relationship, your job? You know, all the things that we could point to in the behavior. And we might want to say, what is really happening for you? In what way is your addiction brilliant? And I know for some people, that's a stretch. I remember when I was working in treatment full time and I would say to a client, tell me all the ways cocaine has been wonderful to you. They would look at me like, what are you talking about? Every counselor is telling me how bad cocaine is and I shouldn't be doing it. I said, well, let's start with all the ways that it's been really wonderful in your life, because I have this profound idea. We don't change unless we want to. So how do we help someone get in touch with what they really truly want? And that's a starting point for them to start looking at if the behavior, the addiction, the substance use, whatever it is it actually bringing them what they desire? And in most cases, it's not. Then they can start to be empowered to make the change.
That is one of your great geniuses. And it's something that I so appreciate, because it's really true. It's like, don't blame, don't shame, but align. It's really it's an Aikido move, right? You know, you're not confronting, you're redirecting the energy. So it's beautiful. All right, this is just a homeopathic dose of TJ Woodward medicine. And I really want to encourage everybody right now to go to his website, consciousrecovery.com. Consciousrecovery.com. There he is, dancing in the background. Doing a little gig. And what I love about how you've set this up is people can pick, like, which of these situations are they? So perhaps, I know we have a lot of healing professionals in the audience, and perhaps you're a person in recovery or wanting to be in recovery. I also, if you're really appreciating what TJ has to say, get his book. His book is wonderful. I've bought a couple copies for friends. I read it. My copy got so tethered because it's got all the yellow highlighters and everything in it. It's a beautiful, powerful book. And maybe just take a look at his core principles, because this man, he's the next level of recovery. He's the next level of really bringing compassion into this very difficult circumstance of when any of us have gotten lost in what started as a brilliant idea. So
that's right. Well, thank you, Scott. Yeah, I just want to add to what you're saying, that what my intention for conscious recovery is to be something that can help someone regardless of where they're at, what support group they're going to. You know, The mind is an interesting thing. And many times people will say, is it a replacement for something? Absolutely not. It's an enhancement to whatever you're doing. So if you're in therapy, if you go to refuge recovery, smart recovery, AA, NA, this is a book and a workbook. There's courses. It really is more a framework. And that framework, as we've been discussing, can sound fundamentally different than some of the other frameworks, but that doesn't mean it's incongruent with the other ones. I know for myself that the number one thing that helped me in the beginning was support and community. Conscious Recovery in some ways doesn't offer that. We don't have support groups yet. We have a few that are kind of springing up throughout the country. At this point, the key is to find people that you can connect with that are loving and supporting. And then my hope is Conscious Recovery can offer an additional layer, if you will, asking the question, what if there's a place within you that's whole and perfect? And what if the addiction was brilliant when it began, as Scott said, and then what if it is no longer serving you the way it once did? Start asking those questions because, you know, Scott, you and I are a big believer in curiosity. Asking questions, being open. So Conscious Recovery doesn't have answers. It has a whole lot of questions, though.
And they're beautiful questions and beautifully designed. TJ, God bless you. There is a special place in heaven for you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.